This is Julian speaking, welcoming you to another video out of the breach. I invite you to listen to another part of Eric's story. Part 3. The Second Task. Running the freezing washcloth over his prickling skin, Eric clenched his teeth with displeasure. His muscles ached, echoes of intense sword practice the day before. At least after all this increased training, I can see a difference, he thought, poking at the burgeoning muscles on his stomach. He shrugged into his shirt and fastened the old leather belt around his waist that held the wooden sword, denoting his status as squire. Herbert's words rattled around his head. Was he right? Will I forever be a squire if I stay here? Eric shook his head to clear it and trotted out of his room, up the stairs and across the large hall towards the Baron's office. He knocked and opened the door after a moment's hesitation, revealing the Baron sat at his desk, scribbling through paperwork as usual. "Baron, would you like?" The front door slammed open behind him, and a loud voice boomed over the howling wind outside. "Scoundrels! Knaves! Where are you, Archibald? I need your aid!" As quick as a whippet, the Baron was out of his chair and rushing towards the hall. "Guillemot, what's happened?" Sir Guillemot Poppycock strode inside, and the two men embraced. "Those sea slugs have got her, Archie! We need to go and save her!" As Poppycock straightened, Eric could see his knobbly knees tremble. "Please, come into my office. Eric, fetch him a drink. Do you have a man with you, Gilly?" "Thank you, Archie. Yes, they're passing the carriage and the pig to your stable hands." Eric rushed to a cabinet, pouring a dark liquid into a glass. The aromatic scent of strong brandy wafted up to him. Carefully, he gave the glass to the now sitting Poppycock, who grasped it in shaking fingers. Watching the door eagerly, Eric was thrilled to see old Caldus and Sir Hawkswash jog into the house. Eric waved to them, and the man walked quietly inside, joining Eric to stand at the rear of the office. "Hello, lad," Caldus muttered, and Clemency nodded a greeting. Their attention snapped to Poppycock, who slammed the empty glass onto the desk. "You have to help me, Archie! They've taken her!" Poppycock's eyes were intense. Sitting back behind the desk, the Baron steepled his fingers, asking, "Gilly, tell us slowly who's taken whom." Nodding, Poppycock ran his hand over his face. "I've been busy for the past few weeks investigating strange goings-on in the waters of Sunrise Bay. Ermentrude knew the signs and realized that I'll be distracted for a while, so decided to take a little trip navigating around Tauber. She completed her journey around our southern shores without issue, and according to all reports, the good old salty drop made excellent time to Macburg." He twisted the glass onto the table, lost in thought. "What happened next, Gilly?" the Baron asked softly. "The ship left port a few days later, heading around the northern coast to complete the circuit. For some reason, that barnacle-crusted captain decided he wanted to visit Treasure Trove, so took them through the archipelago." He looked at his hands. "That's not normally a problem, is it?" the Baron asked. It wasn't a problem, not until recently, but now the route isn't as safe as it once was, and she... What's happened, Gilly? Archie, my wife has been captured by merfolk. Eric's eyebrows shot up. I've always wanted to meet a mer person. Why? What is it they want? The Baron scowled. Poppycock roared. To negotiate! The cheek! Instead, I'm going to slit all their throats and throw them into the sea. Will you help me? The Baron nodded sadly, his expression distant. Of course I will, but it might be the best to send someone else rather than go ourselves. I want the satisfaction of seeing the light leave their eyes myself. I'm going to cut off their fins and feed them to the sharks, pull out their teeth and... This is an insult that won't go unpunished, Gilly. However, do you want to get her returned safely? Poppycock ran his hand over his hair and took a deep breath. Without question. Please, you have to help me get her back safely. I don't know what I'd do if she... I trust your advice, Archie. I really do. Can we not rough them up a bit, though? The Baron plucked at his bottom lip in thought. No, not yet. Instead, we send someone to treat with them, to negotiate her release, and then we deal with whatever has been agreed later. All right. Who should it be? I'll give them full authority to speak on my behalf if you think that's best. The Baron's eyes settled on Eric, their color shifting to amber. I think you're best suited for this task. Wouldn't you agree, Eric? Eric's heartbeat quickened. Yes, I'll do whatever I can to bring her back safely. Poppycock's face paled, then turned purple. The Squire? I need someone with a calm head and combat skills should things go wrong. What does this boy know? The Baron smiled, amber eyes sparkling. He has learned a lot these past 6 months and has my full trust to walk this path, should he choose to take it. It will be dangerous, though, with threats both seen and unexpected. I can do it, sir. Eric stepped forwards and bowed before he continued, but I will need help. Eric wiped boar spit onto his trousers, Trotter's loud crunching next to his ear a merry accompaniment. The day was still young, early morning light flickering through the bare treetops, breaking up the last patches of moonstones still clinging to darkness. Cuckoo, Calder's beloved chicken, cluckled contentedly, her breath puffing into the cold air. After spending a day and evening in each other's company, the soldiers walked in companionable silence. Eric thought back to the last tramps through a forest with a friend and frowned. I wonder if what Herbert said was true. Will I really never be a knight or a noble while I'm a member of the Commonwealth? Groat for your thoughts, young squire, Clemency asked from his saddle. Oh, it's nothing. Eric averted his gaze, staring steadfastly at the frosty road. Caldus snorted. We'll be walking a little while yet. You might as well tell us. Well, how much longer do you think it will take for me to become a knight? Clemency best answer that. I'm still a lowly soldier, Caldas chuckled. I don't think he's really too upset about that, Eric thought, puzzled. It took me many years, young Eric. It was only after I found trotters here that I was able to prove myself sufficiently skilled. Clemency scratched the boar between the ears, eliciting a satisfied squeal. Maybe it won't ever happen then, Eric thought sadly. He scratched Trotter's side absently, the fur rough under his fingers. Watching Eric, Clemency's moustache bristled. What I can say is that the Baron keeps his word to his people. He vowed that you would be a knight one day, and I believe you shall. Really? Staring into the middle distance, Eric's eyes shone. Absolutely, a fine knight in shining armor atop a noble steed, riding into the fray for your lord's honor and fighting evil, Clemency cited. There's nothing better. Oh, do you think I could be a noble too? Eric had to stop from skipping down the road with excitement. Calder's chuckle quietly quashed his enthusiasm. The likes of us will never be nobles, lad. The poppycocks, the fancy heads, and all the rest of them, they're born nobles. Then the likes of Kaufman, he's a businessman what's made a fortune from his brain. Oh. Caldas glanced at Eric and softened his expression. We're soldiers and knights, defending our lords, our people, and our homes. It's what we're meant for, and there's naught wrong with that. Don't you forget that, lad. Eric fiddled with the hilt of his wooden sword. Why do you think the Baron will make me a knight, Clemency? Because of the promise he made. Eric missed the stern glance Caldas threw up to Clemency at those words. What promise? Eric was puzzled. Clemency shifted in the saddle. He gave his word to train you as a knight when you came into the household. A lot of the servants heard him, so it made its way around your household and onto other noble families' households too. It's how we know about it. Oh, I hadn't realized he decided to make me a knight that long ago. Caldas said, Aye, if he were to turn away from you now, he'd been breaking his word, and no noble likes to be shown up as a liar. Then why hasn't he given me a better sword yet? Caldas laughed. Anything can be a weapon if you use it right. Let's stop a short while and see what we can do with that sword of yours. Caldas led Eric to a smooth stone and sat down, letting Cuckoo out of her carrying pouch to stretch her legs. We're not too far from the coast now. I'm going to see what I can see. Clemency nodded to the two soldiers and trotted into the trees. Right, lad. Let's have a look at that weapon of yours. Gingerly, Eric placed the hilt of the wooden sword in Caldas' outstretched hand. Eric expected Caldas to laugh. Instead, he examined the weapon closely, handling it like it was finely owned steel. Can you do anything with it? Eric asked quietly. Caldas riffled through a pouch at his side. Retrieving a whetstone, he smiled at Eric. But that's for metal weapons. This is wood. Caldas flipped over the stone to reveal a rough surface. He smiled at Eric and began carefully rubbing it along the wooden blade. Eric watched as rough splinters fell away, the wood taking on a gentle sheen as its edges were smoothed. They sat in silence while Caldas worked on the flat of the blade, then moved to the edge, carefully running the stone repeatedly downwards. Here, feel, Caldus eventually said, holding the sword towards Eric. Eric frowned and ran his thumb across the edge of the blade. It feels sharp. It's certainly sharper than it was. Caldus smiled and continued to work on the blade, asking, "How long have we been doing this?" "About an hour, maybe?" Eric said, looking to the sky for the wan sun behind a sheet of white clouds. Caldus held the hilt to Eric, who took it and peered at the blade with a grin. "It's wonderful." "It takes a long time and careful attention to turn a plank of wood into a working sword. Don't forget that, young squire." Caldus winked at him. Before Eric could reply, heavy footfalls crashed through the forest behind them. The two men readied their swords, staring into the dimness. From among the trees, Clemency bounced atop Trotters and called, "Follow me! I've found something!" "That definitely looks like some sort of prison. There's some lumpy caves and I can see iron bars at the mouth." Caldus scratched his chin. Eric squinted at the island at the end of a long, shallow causeway, breaking waves stretching up towards the flat platform. "Are there any guards?" "Not that I can see on the surface, but it's merfolk, then they'd be underwater." The two men crawled back from the cliff edge and told the still-mounted Clemency what they'd seen. "The Baron put you in charge, Eric, so what do you suggest?" Clemency asked, rubbing on one of Trotter's ears. Eric pursed his lips. "I think we should try and talk to them." Caldus nodded and said, I've heard they can be aggressive. If we rush in, Ermentrude might take the brunt." "We can't have that." Clemency thumped a fist into his palm. Surprised, Eric asked, "Do you know her well, then?" "She's a good friend of mine and Jeremy's. Not that Sir Poppycock knows." "Oh." "She joins us for conversation when her husband is away and she has nothing else to do. She and Jeremy have been knitting a blanket together. He'd be devastated if anything happened to her. She's a quiet and kind person, and doesn't deserve to be murdered by brine-brained fish people." Caldus nodded. "Aye, she's that. I don't know her as well as you do, but I couldn't ask for a kinder mistress." A real-life damsel in distress. Eric suddenly realized he was on his first truly knightly mission. Carefully, Caldus picked a safe route down fallen rocks to the craggy beach, then over large stones to the sea. The tide had begun to run out. The shallow causeway stretched below them with only a toe depth of water over the sand. They hopped down to walk between the retreating waves towards the island. "It's a long way," Eric thought, watching the water and staring at the island so far ahead. The sea spray was cold. Shivering in the icy breeze, fear wriggled in his stomach like an eel. As they reached the center of the causeway, 4 muddy green heads with sharp cheekbones and long fins emerged from the surf on either side of them. Large almond-shaped yellow eyes shone. The central black pupils had shrunk to a pinprick in the light. Twisted, sharp, shell-tipped spears pointed in the group's direction. The merfolk growled, the water around their throats vibrating. Eric stepped forwards. Swallowing his nerves, he called, "We're here to represent Sir Poppycock, whose wife you have taken. We have his full authority and wish to treat with you on his behalf." The vibration stilled, but the large eyes remained fixed on the group. A tall figure stepped to the edge of the island ahead of them. She was over 6 feet tall, with high cheekbones like the others, and the same fins that looked to Eric like pointed ears. Her waist-length hair was deep green like seaweed, which matched the color of the silky tunic that hung to her calves, cinched at the waist with a simple blue cord. A large stone hung around her neck, glowing like sunlight through clear water. She extended her webbed hands and said, her voice rasping, "Welcome, landwalkers. My name is Olde. I am Muhatu, or Queen of this shoal. You may treat with me." The group exchanged glances and strode forwards. 5 heads and tips of spears appeared behind Olde, watching the group splashing towards the island in silence. When they eventually arrived, Eric could see steps roughly hewn into the rocky side at irregular intervals. Eric began scrambling up the slippery steps, seaweed lying limply either side of the route. "Ta-da for now, Trotters. I'll be back soon, old boy. No need to fret," Clemency said, his voice carrying from below. Trotters huffed a miserable breath, and Cuckoo clucked loudly, irritated that she had been ignobly left in one of Trotter's saddlebags. A crab scuttled across Eric's path into a limpet-encrusted hole, so he paused to check Caldus was still behind. The old tracker smiled reassuringly, and Eric continued his climb. At the top, he pulled himself to standing and helped Caldus up the final step. Waiting for Clemency, they paused to look around the top of the rock. It was uneven but relatively flat, providing a large platform that easily held the 2 parties at a distance. Olde was stood slightly in front of the 5 other merfolk, each with their own shining necklace. Behind them sat Ermintrude Poppycock, bound in rough robes, damp and shivering. A rusty iron door stood open into a craggy cave not far behind her. A second gate was closed, and Eric couldn't make out what was behind its bars. Clemency pulled himself to the top with bandy legs, stood and said, "My apologies for the delay, Muhatu. My steed is nervous of water." The merfolk croaked chuckles, and Olde said, "Your apology is accepted. Now tell me who you are and what you hope to achieve this day." Eric swallowed. Scanning the gathered merfolk, his attention was caught by one at the rear with amber eyes. She smiled mischievously at him and winked. Buoyed, Eric strode forward and announced, "This is Old Caldus, expert tracker and wise guide. My other companion is Sir Hawkswash, knight of the Poppycock household and man of honor. I am Eric, squire of the House of Fancyhead, representative of the Baron and of Sir Guillemot Poppycock. I speak with their authority in all matters. I wish to retrieve your prisoners and reach an agreement with you to stop this happening again." Eric smiled politely and thought, "Where did that come from? I bet Gertrude would be very proud of me right now." Olde scrutinized him, her large eyes shining. "Is it usual for a pub to be presented for something so serious?" Undeterred, Eric continued. "My lords felt that by coming themselves they may present a more aggressive front. We are valued members of their households. Our loss would come as a huge blow." "Indeed," Alohi folded her arms and drummed her fingers with gentle, wet slaps. Eric bowed. Alohi squinted at him.
Very well. Let us treat Eric, Squire. The Commonwealth fleet has changed its usual route, and now sails too close to the shrine. Kaiana disapproves. She will wreck your ships, as well as our homes, with her displeasure. We tried to discuss the matter with the captain of the Poppycock boat, but what was it he said? Alapai?
A broad-chested merfolk stepped forward with a deep, rasping voice said,
I believe it was, may Gary shrivel you in the sunfish turd, wise Mohatu.
He bowed, but kept his eyes on Eric. Eric's mouth dropped open. Before he could think anything, he said, That's terrible! Surprise flashed over Alohi's face.
You do not think this funny? Many of the crew did. It's unfortunate so many of them drowned before they could reach shore and share their little joke.
She smiled, revealing pointed teeth behind her plum lips. I am so sorry. That's so rude of them. Of course, the ships will change their route. Urgently, Caldus whispered in his ear.
What are you doing?
Getting his wife back, Eric whispered back.
You don't have the authority to change the course of the entire Commonwealth fleet.
Eric stared at the merfolk with amber eyes.
Today, I do, he said resolutely. Is there a problem?
Alohi's toothy smile stretched wider. No, not at all, Mohatu. Eric strode forwards and gave a deep bow. I swear on my upcoming knighthood that the Commonwealth fleet will no longer sail so close. Eric remained still, listening for an answer that eventually rasped above.
Very well, Eric, Squire of the House Fancy Hat. You may take this woman and have our assurances that no more ships will be attacked before the next moon. If nothing changes, we will begin our attacks with all the power of Kaiana's righteous fury behind us.
Eric stood, stretching out his hand. This is it. I'm about to get Ermentrude back. Movement behind the second barred gate caught his eye, and he stared at 3 figures urgently waving bound hands at him. He dropped his hand before Alohi had reached him, saying, Who else have you captured? The smile vanished from Alohi's face.
More trespassers in sacred waters. They claimed the rudder had broken on their ship.
May we see them? Alohi pursed her lips and nodded to one of the 4 merfolk. The 5th, with amber eyes, was nowhere in sight. The merfolk strode to the gate, unlocked it with a rusty key, and it swung open with screaming hinges. 3 bound and bedraggled gnomes stumbled out, huddling around Ermentrude. A female gnome with blonde braided hair called urgently, Please, help us! Wait, I recognize her. That's Joanna, a princess of some sort. We can't leave them here. Eric thought furiously and quickly said, We'll take them too.
You came here to discuss her release.
Alohi pointed at Ermentrude and hissed, the fins on her head quivering. Calder strode forwards and placed a hand on Eric's shoulder. Aye, that we did, and we've done that. Come on, Eric. Let's the four of us head home. Eric spun to Caldus and said quietly, What? No, we can't leave them here. Caldus lowered his voice and said, Aye, we can. They're not who we're here for. But they're Commonwealth too. Aye, they may be, but we... No! Eric shrugged away from Caldus and said loudly, We're taking them with us. He strode towards the captives, his pulse pounding in his ears.
Halt, Landwalker!
Alapai shouted. Eric's pace slowed and he frowned. But we agree to discuss the release of all captives. I merely want to... Alapai hissed. Lowering his spear, he rushed Eric, who twisted out of the way. Drawing his own sword, Eric pirouetted and opened a long cut across the merfolk's back. Alapai grit his teeth in pain, jabbing the spear at Eric again. Eric didn't move fast enough this time, and the twisted point pierced his shoulder. At that, Caldus barked, Clemency! The two older men ran forward to engage the other merfolk with furious cries. Pulling the spear tip from his shoulder with a gasp, Eric glanced across and saw the gnomes frantically rubbing their bonds on the rough rocks. That's it. We can do this, Eric thought with a rush, ducking a clumsy punch from Alapai, then a quick kick from the merfolk, followed by another downward punch. Grunting with pain, Eric rolled to one side and stood in a fluid motion, running his sword along the side of the merfolk's knee as he did. Alapai hissed in frustration and launched himself at Eric, who didn't move quickly enough this time. Taking advantage of Eric's sluggishness, Alapai wrapped his fingers around Eric's throat and squeezed. Pain flashed through Eric's neck, and he clawed impotently at the merfolk's moist fingers. His pulse thudded in his ears, the blood flowing slowly, and he couldn't catch his breath. He started to panic. Thrusting his hands towards the merfolk, he tried to go for the large eyes, but he was too far away. Desperately, Eric grabbed at the shining stone that was hanging a few inches from his face. The brittle cord snapped, and Eric flung the stone away with a rubbery arm, sending surprise and panic flashing across the merfolk's face. Then Eric could breathe again, the pressure on his neck gone, and Alapai no longer in sight. Eric shuddered in a breath and coughed, scrabbling further away to get out of the merfolk's reach. Instead, Eric watched Alapai convulsing on the ground, his legs fusing together into a long whipping tail. The illusion of hair and the tunic disappeared, leaving him bald and bare-chested. The green and grey scales all over his body shivered, like loose sand blown in the wind. Alapai pulled himself across the rock quickly, gasping for air through straining gills on his neck. With a last heave, he disappeared over the side, and Eric heard a loud splash below. Everyone had watched what happened in shocked silence, the thought of fighting forgotten. As one of the merfolk disengaged, hissing at the humans, and formed a small ring around Alohi, Eric turned to the captives. His throat burning, he rasped, "Come on, we need to..." The female gnome pulled Ermentrude and Joanna to her and ran towards the edge of the island. A misshapen backpack hummed and spluttered, propelling her into the air as she jumped. They dipped down, then gradually picked up altitude, shooting towards the beach, the engine groaning with effort. "Oh, that's helpful. Where did she get that from?" Eric thought woozily. "Come on," Aldous called, running for the steps. The male gnome held a large hammer aloft and started running. Eric fell in beside him, and the four of them sprinted for the steps down. Clemency disappeared over the side, with Caldus not too far behind. Eric stopped to let the gnome go first. Glancing over his shoulder, he watched the merfolk jump off the side of the island, releasing strange, screeching calls as they did. Eric scrambled down the steps, then jumped the last couple, landing heavily on the causeway. Grasping his bleeding shoulder, he scrambled to his feet and began to run. Clemency and Trotters were already a third of the way along the causeway, ducking spears hastily thrown in their direction. Cuckoo squawked her defiance too, leaving a trail of white feathers. Caldus and the gnome had a good head start on Eric, but all three of them were ducking spears and arrows. Then the buzzing gnome flashed past. Grasping Caldus and the last gnome with a shout of triumph, Eric watched the gnomes kiss, sending them dipping towards the sea.
"Oi! Watch it!"
Caldus shouted. They gradually gained altitude, soaring towards the shore. The pilot dodged a thrown spear, and the machine in the backpack buzzed with effort again. Eric sprinted. He pumped his legs as fast as he could, panting, breath catching in his sore throat. He could see Clemency on the beach ahead and realized he was halfway there. "I am the only target now, though," he thought, terror making his legs move yet faster. He saw a spear from the corner of his eye and he ducked. Then a second and a third followed quickly. He dropped to the sand to roll, an arrow grazing his back. Then he was up and sprinting again. "A third of the causeway to go. We might make this." He huffed a painful yet cheerful breath and stared longingly at the frantically waving figures on the beach. "They are cheering me on." Pride washed over him and he smiled. Registering pain in his side, his smile faltered and he dropped limply to the sand. A shaft was poking out from underneath his ribs and he gingerly pulled it out. The coral-tipped arrow glittered red in the faint sunshine. His vision swam again. He pressed his hand against the wound and fumbled in his pack for his familiar healing salves and bandages. His fingers worked on their own, his mind foggy in pain. He lay there gasping, the merfolk calls and cries getting louder. "Here endeth Eric the Squire," he coughed. A faint voice carried over the rolling waves, and merfolk shrieks. "Get up, Eric! You're as tough as old boots! You can do it! Come on!" A knight would never give in. Eric narrowed his eyes and pushed up from the sand. He stood on shaking legs, cheering and shouts faintly reaching him on the wind. He stumbled forwards, his feet only managing a shuffling run, his head swimming. A distant buzzing grew louder. "I hope that's not my heart stopping or one of them spears." Then the gnome had him in her strong grasp. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't hurt you. Please don't die. Loki, Johanna, move out of the way. I'm gonna land." The wind was cool on his face. Groaning, Eric tried to look at the view, but instead, his vision went black. Trotters released a trump that was so foul it would have rivaled Doug. Eric's eyes flew open and he coughed, making his side flare with pain. So he gasped and his throat seared. "This is terrible," he thought miserably and slumped back down to lean on Trotters again, which made his shoulder ache. I'm pleased you're awake already, Eric. The woman's voice was soft and quiet. Eric didn't recognize it. Peering over a fire, he realized it belonged to Ermintrude Poppycock. "Oh, my lady, He tried to move, but his cold and aching muscles wouldn't listen to him. "Please, don't move," Joanna said from the other side of the fire with a wince. "All right." He rasped and felt for his water skin. He looked around the camp for the others, carefully sipping the cool water, but it was only the two women and trotters left with him. Cuckoo was settled by the fire too, a gently snoring feathery lump. Ermintrude smiled and said, "Don't worry, Caldus and Clemency have gone looking for more firewood and some food." Joanna also smiled at him. Belle is flying Loki back to their home, so they're safe too. "I need to discuss a matter with the Baron, so I'm going to join you on your trip back to Fancidale." Eric nodded. At least everyone else got out without being hurt. "Thank you for saving all of us," Joanna said. She threw more wood onto the fire, sending orange embers floating into the cold night air. "It's what any knight would do," he croaked and drank deeply to mask a blush. "Your companions would have left us behind, though." Joanna couldn't hide the anger in her voice. Eric shrugged stiffly, unsure what to say, and reflected on her words. "I thought the whole point of being a knight was to protect people. Joanna and the other gnomes are Commonwealth. They are our people. So why did Caldus want to leave them?" "Leave poor Eric alone. He's had a difficult day." Ermintrude leaned over him and adjusted his blankets. She was petite, with dark hair and blue eyes that were bruised with tiredness, but her face was gentle. Eric stared at her. She looked nothing like her husband. "Have we met before, my lady?" Ermintrude chuckled. "No, but you're squire to my husband's best friend, so I know who you are, young Eric. Hopefully you'll come and see me the next time you train with some of our soldiers." Smiling, Eric nodded and closed his eyes, the warmth of the fire slowly thawing his limbs. Ermintrude handed Joanna a blanket and said to Eric, "It would be lovely to get to know you better. You clearly have some skill in diplomacy as well as fighting. It's always so nice to see a young man improve and excel. You would have made your mother proud today, Eric." A cold, familiar weight landed on his chest, forcing his eyes to open with a start. "Sorry? What did you say?" He couldn't look at her, so stared at the stars far above. "I said you would have made your mother proud, and Joyce Ann, of course. She was so fond of your mother." The icy weight beat in time with his heart. He was surprised by how calmly he asked, "Did you know my mother well?" "Not well exactly, but I saw her a few dozen times over the years when the Fancyheads come to visit. Sarah was handmaiden to Joyce Ann Fancyhead, of course. Sarah was quiet and very kind, and she would join us, Joyce Ann and I, for tea. Then one day someone else arrived with Joyce Ann, and I asked, 'Where's young Sarah Dolan?' And she said, 'Gone to work, somewhere else.' She didn't say where, and she looked so sad I didn't ask. Joyce Ann was killed a few years later. I feel so sorry for Archibald losing her like that. But then you came along a few years after that, and the Baron had a way to honor his wife by taking in Sarah's baby. Such a sad tale, but look at where you are now." Ermintrude smiled down at him kindly, unaware the revelations she was so casually spilling were stabbing into his heart. I didn't know her. Eric swallowed, his throat tight, and thought, I didn't even know her name. Joanna stared into the fire and said, I only have faint memories of my parents, so I understand some of that pain. I was lucky to have my aunt and uncle, though, and it sounds like you have been well looked after by the fancy head household. Yes, Eric croaked. Thankfully, his sore throat hid the emotion in his rough voice. The two women stared into the fire, and Eric turned his gaze back up to the stars. Realization chilled him as he thought over the revelations. They all knew her. They must have done. Flintlock, Calders, Hawksbush, all the other soldiers, all the old knights, and the Baron, all these years. We managed to catch a couple of eels and found some wild vegetables, Calders said cheerfully, wandering into the firelight. Ah, Eric, you're awake. How are you feeling? Clemency asked, settling down to prepare the vegetables. Cold. Eric shuddered and pulled the blanket up to hide his face, his mind racing. They all know. They all know who my mother is. They might even know who my father is. Why didn't any of them tell me in all this time? Why didn't the Baron say something? At least I know now that he will make me a knight. But do I really want to align myself with him? Can I trust him anymore? Can I trust any of them? Maybe Herbert was really right about the Commonwealth all along. The betrayal sat coldly in his chest, making him shiver. Gingerly he rolled into a ball against Trotter's flank and squeezed his eyes closed. He willed sleep to come, tears silently sliding down his face. A seagull plonked down onto the island, cold waves throwing spray over its surface again, and the causeway hidden beneath the sea. The stars twinkled above in the clear sky, illuminating the rocky surface. The seagull's shape shivered and unfurled into a humanoid fox. She shook her body, fluffing her fur and puffing out her tail. Softly she padded over the rocks, looking for something, skirts swirling gently in the cold breeze. Grinning, she squatted down and pulled a glass bottle from a pouch at her side. She dipped the bottle into a puddle, filling it with seawater. She held it up to peer at her quarry, watching small pieces of seaweed swirl within the water, reddish with merfolk blood. Something caught her attention on the mainland, and she stood staring into the distance. She stayed still for several long moments, sea spray tickling her face. With a shake of the head, she shoved a cork into the top of the bottle and carefully put it inside her pouch. She sighed deeply and scanned around her, turning her attention out to the waves she noticed ahead. Reflective eyes shone in the darkness, watching. Wiggling her fingers, she called in Marish, "Kuei." The shining eyes narrowed, and she threw back her head, laughing heartily. Her form folded, and she became a seagull again, soaring up and over the waves. Passing over the merfolk, her dark eyes glowed orange, and she dropped a fizzing magical mote from a tucked foot. The burning amber scalded the merfolk, who hissed,
Leave us, Dranja the Pesterer.
The merfolk dove beneath the waves to cool her silent fin. Dranja the seagull cawed her amusement, turning towards the mainland on more important business. She honed in on the well-hidden campsite and passed over it, staring down at the lump huddled under the rough blanket. Dranja circled around, still staring downwards, and thought, "A second path is open to you, Eric of the Commonwealth. Does it glitter as much as it once did?" The lump remained curled beneath the blanket, and Dranja soared south, towards the Weirdwood. We're here to represent Sir Poppycock, who